Several years ago, one of my mentors said to me, Brian, if you want to be an effective leader, you're going to have to learn how to embrace ambiguity. Some people can't do that. They just can't handle it. They can't navigate it. And then he said this, your effectiveness as a leader will be determined by your ability to navigate seasons of uncertainty and embrace ambiguity. And that's what I feel inspired to teach about today, embracing ambiguity. About 10 years ago, while I was working on my doctorate in leadership, I read a book by William Bridges entitled Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change. And it was a book targeted towards organizational leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, and it struck such a chord with them that Bridges then wrote an accompanying book that was targeted toward the individual. And that book was called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. But listen closely to the subtitle of that book, Strategies for Coping with Difficult, Painful, and Confusing Times in Your Life. If you haven't read it, obviously based on the subtitle, this is a really good book for us to be diving into right now. I've thought about that book a lot since our lives were upended by this pandemic. But I've reflected on it much more in the last few hours. Just hours before I was set to preach this message, my father-in-law passed away. It's been a really difficult last few weeks for Haley and for our family. Her dad's health deteriorated rapidly a couple weeks ago, and it's been a roller coaster ride of emotions. And then just a few hours ago, he stepped from this life into his heavenly reward. And the irony of all ironies is that her dad passed away on the 9-year anniversary of my dad's death. I started to get somebody to preach this message this weekend, somebody else. But as I've always told you, I'm just a fellow traveler on the same journey that you're on. And if Haley and I can help you navigate your pain by being honest, open, and vulnerable with how we're navigating our own, that's the way we feel called to pastor. It just feels more real, more authentic, and right for us to do it this way. And that's why I point you to William Bridges' books, because they've helped us. They've helped me. I actually did an entire sermon series on some of the material Bridges offers in his book about transitions, and it's really one of the most watched sermon series or listened to sermon series in my tenure here as a pastor. And today I just want to pause for a moment and look and see what the Word and the Spirit might be saying to us about navigating transitions in each of our own personal lives. For Haley, it's grief. It's a future without her father. And for my kids, it's a future without their grandpa. For you, it may be the loss of a job. Maybe you've been laid off or furloughed during this pandemic, or maybe you're in a transition where your job just completely ended, or maybe you're navigating a season of divorce. For all of us, it's the loss of a life pre-pandemic, and we're wondering what it's going to look like when it returns back to normal. And notice I keep saying transitions. Most people talk about change, leading change, managing change, but change is not the biggest problem. Change is an event. It happens and then the change is over. Transition is the process of dealing with the change that goes on for months and years after the event happens. People are said to resist change, but in reality, what they're resisting is the transition process. Navigating the transition is what's hard, but life transitions are inevitable, and learning to navigate them biblically will determine whether you live a full life or an embittered life. William Bridges, the psychologist that wrote the books, he separates transitions into 3 stages, and just being aware that we're processing through those stages will help us navigate transition more effectively. Stage 1, the first stage, is the end zone. And the end zone is where we disengage from the old ways of doing things and we let go of who we were in that situation. Here are a few examples. Let's just say you've been single for a long time, you got married. Your whole life has been centered around being single. You had your own bathroom, you had your own bank account. Because every transition is not a bad transition. Some transitions are good, but even good transitions require an adjustment. And so you have to let go of the old way of doing things and you're starting something new. But there is an end of something when you get married, an end of being single. Or maybe you have a baby. I mean, this is a great transition. It's a blessing from God. But you've been in a friend group where everybody is a couple without kids and you're traveling and you're footloose and fancy free. And you're the first couple in your friend group to have a child. And all of a sudden things are different for you. It is an end of something. And you might feel that maybe you're not as welcome in that group as you were. Or you watch them as the parent responsibilities begin to restrict your travel or some of your behaviors. And they're continuing on traveling the world and you feel left out because even though it's a good thing, it's the end of something. It is an end zone. Or maybe it's you coming to life in Christ. You accepted Jesus as the Lord of your life. It's in that moment where you begin something new that you also end something. You let go of old ways and who you were in that situation. The second stage in Bridges stages is the neutral zone. And in the neutral zone, this is the confusing in-between state. When you're in the neutral zone, you're not who and where you were, but you're not yet who and where, or where you're not yet who you will be or where you're going to be. You're kind of caught in the middle. Maybe you're in between jobs. Your life was defined by a certain job and now you don't have a new job and you're kind of in between. Or maybe you're in the grieving process. Your heart is still far broken over the loss of a loved one and you haven't yet healed from that loss and you're caught in between in the grief process. Maybe you're picking up the pieces after a divorce. Your life is still so intertwined with that individual and you haven't yet found the new identity at being single. You're in between, or maybe you're just wanting your life to go back the way it was pre-pandemic. And you're wondering what it's going to look like or if it's ever going to be the same again. This is what it looks like to feel the ambiguity of the neutral zone. And the third and the final stage is the new beginning. And this new beginning is the point where we start growing familiar and begin accepting, although we may not necessarily be liking, the new reality that change brings. Listen to what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 7 about transitions. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. And then he goes on, and this is almost like, oh yes, here's my last kind of parting word. Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. It's as if Solomon is saying, if you want to finish the transition process well, pride will have to become patience. And getting mad at God or getting mad at people or getting mad at the process is only going to slow down your journey and make you look foolish. It's only going to delay the new thing that God is trying to do in your life. And one last piece of advice. Don't look back and long for the way it used to be. That's not wisdom. As difficult as it is, press on. The Old Testament journey of the children of Israel is a perfect biblical backdrop to illustrate the stages of transition. They miraculously crossed the Red Sea and were delivered from Egypt. This was their end zone. They marked the end of being a nation of slaves when they left Egypt. That's the end zone. Then they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness, becoming the people that God wanted them to be. That wilderness season was their neutral zone. And then finally, they eventually made their way into the promised land, which marked their new beginning. I want us to focus our time today on that middle phase, the neutral zone. It's probably the most significant part of transitioning properly. How you manage the neutral zone will determine whether you become bitter or whether or not you become better. It's that confusing, chaotic, in-between state. It is no man's land. It is a desert place. I don't care if the transition is a good transition, if you got a promotion, if you got a raise, if you had the birth of a child. Transitions can be positive or negative, and regardless, there is a neutral zone, a chaotic center, a desert place, the middle ground that has to be navigated well. Even success can be a trauma if it is not managed properly. In the case of the children of Israel, the wilderness of the neutral zone experience takes up most of their story. It was 40 years of desert wandering. But it was in that desert, in their wilderness, that a population of slaves became strong enough to conquer their enemies. They went from a nation of slaves to a powerful nation that was strong enough to conquer their enemies. And that development happened in their wilderness experience. There is a divine purpose in your desert experience. God doesn't waste pain. And He's using the most difficult part of the transition process to transform you into the man or the woman that He wants you to be. The people that followed Moses out of Egypt, out of slavery, soon forgot the miseries of their servitude and began looking back with nostalgia on the good old days in Egypt. They complained about the lack of food in the wilderness. And when they got the food in the wilderness, they complained about the quality of the food. And then they complained about their leader. And then minor rebellions and major rebellions broke out. And what you need to understand about the people of Israel is they are embodying real human feelings when you're navigating a neutral zone. These kinds of feelings, these kinds of experiences are typical for all of us when we find ourselves in a neutral zone. Because crossing the Red Sea gets the people out of Egypt, but the neutral zone gets the Egypt out of the people. And it took 40 years for God to get the Egypt out of the people before they were ever ready to walk into their new beginning. They needed the neutral zone to lose their identity as slaves under the rule of Pharaoh. They needed to learn what it was like to be a free people under the rule of God. And their wilderness prepared them to walk into their new beginning, the destiny that God had for them. These desert or neutral zone experiences have been written about by ancient Christians for centuries. Matter of fact, they even coined a term to describe the desert, wilderness, or neutral zone experiences. They referred to it as the dark night of the soul. Now, that term was originally used by St. John of the Cross all the way back in the 1500s, but it has been repeated through the years by Christian mystics and writers as a term to describe when it feels like God has suddenly abandoned us. In the dark night of your soul, doubt creeps in. Questions arise within you, and then questions arise around you. I want you to listen to David, a man we call the man after God's own heart, in a very honest moment, expressing his feelings in his own dark night of the soul. And sometimes the neutral zone just feels like this. Psalm 13, O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with the anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. In these very honest moments, we witness King David going through some serious confusion, ambiguity, and anguish. But I want you to notice, it was never condemned. It was never mentioned as unfaithful, because this is simply part of being human, even for a man after God's own heart. David didn't hide his anguish under fake religious devotion. He was honest with God. And I believe honesty before God is the highest form of reverence. It says, God, I trust you even in my dark night. I trust you in my desert. I may not understand you, but I trust you. I cannot track you, but I still trust you. I trust that even when you are silent, I realize you are not still. Listen to how David ends that same conversation in Psalm 13. But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because He is good to me. You can trust in the goodness of God to you, even when life isn't making any sense in the neutral zone. God used Israel's desert experience to uproot Egypt from their heart. And the ancient church fathers believed that God uses the dark night of the soul to purge us, to cleanse us, to get us prepared for our ultimate promised land when we see Him ultimately and finally face to face. There is purpose in your pain. One of the greatest tools that God has ever used to help me find my purpose in life is my pain. I am in ministry today because of my personal pain, my deserts, my wilderness experiences, my neutral zones, whatever you want to call them, they have defined me. God has used them to define me for the good. I have lived them. Some of the greatest gifts in my life have been born out of the pain of my neutral zone, and some of the greatest gifts that have ever been given to this world were born out of neutral zone experiences. Paul's prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, were all written, they're known as prison epistles, those books of the New Testament, because Paul wrote them while in prison, while in chains, a gift while waiting in a neutral zone. The dreamer in Joseph never took shape until he sat in an unjust prison. Darlene Zschech wrote "Shout to the Lord," one of the most recognized worship songs in the history of humanity, when she was in the lowest point of her life in her own dark night of the soul. And if you go back through history, Christian history, the greatest songs that have ever been given to the church were written in the songwriter's dark night, the lowest points of their lives. The anvil of the neutral zone squeezes the best out of us. Like the crushing of the olive produces the oil, so the wilderness and the desert forms us and transforms us. The desert develops you for your destiny. In the same way, God sent Moses to the backside of the desert to do something in him so that he would eventually be able to do something through him. And I believe God is using the dark night of your own neutral zone to do something in you so that He will eventually be able to do something through you. But here's the problem. Too often we look at transition like crossing the street. When you're crossing the street, you step off the curb, you try to hurry to the other side as fast as you can, and whatever you do, you don't sit down on the center line to think things over. You would be a fool to stay in the middle of the street any longer than you absolutely have to. But you can't cross the neutral zone like you cross the street. The hurry to get to the other side of a neutral zone is what causes us to miss its value. You can't hurry grief. You can't hurry loss. You can't rush God in the wilderness. It took Israel 40 years. Like the trapeze artist leaving one baton headed to the other handle, suspended in the middle between one trapeze and another. You may feel like you have left the familiar and you are not yet where you are headed. Maybe you left it by force or you left it by choice. Regardless, you're not where you were and you're not yet where you're going. And it's in those suspended moments that you don't know whether you should brace what's coming or you embrace what's coming, or you become paralyzed by fear over what you've lost. Those moments, those suspended moments between the now and the not yet, are the most awkward and difficult moments of our lives. And yet God uses these moments as the greatest seasons of growth and creativity. These are the moments where we decide if this is going to be a breakdown or a breakthrough. The three most significant days in the history of Christianity powerfully reveal the stages of transition. The Friday of the crucifixion was an end zone. The Sunday morning of the resurrection was a new beginning. But it was that in-between time on Saturday night That's the neutral zone, the dark night of the soul. It's in that moment, that Saturday night, when the disciples doubted everything they'd ever believed. In the neutral zone, in the chaos, they turned their back on Him. It's on these Saturday nights, in the neutral zones, the dark nights of the soul, that some deny Him. They run and hide for their lives. Because Saturday is darker than 1,000 midnights. It's when people quit. It's when even the most faithful are tempted to throw in the towel. And yet throughout history, just like it was on that first Easter weekend, every single Saturday eventually becomes a Sunday. Every neutral zone eventually gives way to a new beginning. So if you're a person of faith and you find yourself in a neutral zone, I encourage you to encourage yourself in the Lord. Whisper to your spirit today, Sunday's coming. Saturday night's going to end. My new beginning is on its way. I think that's what David was saying to himself when he wrote these words in Psalm 30. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. In all the night of the neutral zone, in all the darkness of a Saturday, Saturday still brings a certain degree of expectation. Because sooner or later the sun's going to rise. The night is going to fade. Joy is going to return. It always has, and it always will. A few years ago, I was reading an article when I came across a fascinating piece of information. A biologist saw a very compassionate child trying to help a butterfly out of its cocoon. And the biologist ran over to the child and tried to stop him. He begged the child to stop. What the child didn't know, and what many of us don't know, is this. The struggle to get out of the cocoon is absolutely necessary for a caterpillar to become a butterfly. Metamorphosis cannot happen. The transformation cannot be completed without the struggle. As a butterfly is trying to escape the cocoon, the fluid is all in its body. But as it struggles to get out of the cocoon, the struggle is what forces the fluid that is in the caterpillar's body into the wings, causing the wings to enlarge, and then the wings now fill with fluid while in that struggle to get out. Without the struggle, the butterfly never develops. So if you rob the butterfly of its struggle, you rob it of its ability to fly. It never reaches its full potential. Listen, our neutral zones are necessary. Our wildernesses are needed. The struggle has a purpose. And the way that you respond to the dark night of the soul will determine your destiny. But our culture in our society is not good at affirming neutral zones. We want to rush and hurry through the wilderness and the desert. We want to get them over with as quick as possible with this belief that we can avoid the inevitable feelings of sadness and loss and pain if we just rush into something new, a new relationship or a new job, or rush into something else after we're dealing with grief. We don't deal with it. We try to cross the neutral zone like we hurry across the street. We have to learn how to value grief. We have to learn how to define the loss. We have to learn how to name the pain, embrace the ambiguity and the uncertainty, and honor what it is that God might be wanting to do in us in our wilderness and neutral zone experience. We need the space to clearly see who we are becoming, and see which direction God might be beckoning us. The wilderness was so important to Israel, they spent 40 years in it. John the Baptist lived in it, and he would emerge from it on occasion with a fresh word from God. Jesus sought out the wilderness strategically and intentionally at strategic moments of his life. They were planned desert experiences in seasons of personal transition, like the 40-day fast right after his baptism, or the season in the desert right before he performed his first miracle. And the God who passed through the wilderness himself is beckoning you into the wild in order for you to experience his fullness. And he's going to redeem the dark and the desert and use it as a place to renew us. So I'm just wondering, in this season of ambiguity, loss, and transition, what might God be doing in you as you enter in and sit a while in an unmapped, pathless place called the neutral zone? Your response in this season will determine the trajectory of the rest of your life. And you have to know, as uncomfortable and awkward as ambiguity feels, we have to learn how to embrace ambiguity as His people and navigate it. And one of the ways we do that is knowing that even when we don't know what's going on, we serve a good Father who is using this season, the grief, the loss, the pain, and even the awkwardness of something beautiful and new and good, as the difficulty of adjusting to marriage life or a new baby or a new job, whatever. It may be a blessing that has caused a neutral zone in your life, the end of something, and it's the beginning of something, but you're not where you were, you're not fully in your new beginning, and you're in that awkward place of the neutral zone. You have to know you have a good Father who is using this season to do something good in you. I take you back to the beginning, my mentor's wisdom. Brian, if you want to be an effective leader, you're going to have to learn how to embrace ambiguity. Some people can't handle it. Some people can't navigate it. Your effectiveness as a leader will be determined by your ability to navigate seasons of uncertainty and embrace ambiguity. And I would say that's not just wisdom for leaders. That's wisdom for life. I want us to sing today before we finish about the goodness of God, because I think you need to be reminded of it today. And I just want to pray over you before we go anywhere, because my family, as some of you are hearing this message this weekend, I will be with my family grieving the loss of my father-in-law. We're in our own neutral zone right now. And we're going to be navigating that for some time. And so from my own place, I empathetically pray for you today. Whatever has brought you to this awkward Saturday night, the dark night of the soul, I promise you Sunday is coming. Weeping endured for the night, but joy comes in the morning. So, Father, before we do anything else today, I just want to bless them. I speak life over the pain, the loss, the grief. And I pray that the embrace of God would come into homes, it would come into lives, automobiles, wherever one's listening to this or wherever they're watching this, that they would feel the tangible sense of God, that they are not alone. That as they answer or ask very real questions in the darkness, in the loneliness, in the wilderness, in the ambiguity, that they would come to the same conclusion David did in Psalm 19. But you are good. You have rescued me and you will rescue me, and I trust you. You're going to use this season for your glory and my good. So, Father, would you bless them and keep them? Would you make your face shine down upon them? Would you be gracious to them? Would you turn your countenance their direction and give them peace? In Jesus' name, amen.